Good evening. Welcome to the PoliticIt Podcast. Tonight we have Todd Weiler with us, and welcome, Todd. Todd's
thanks, John.
From the Utah State Senate, District 23. I guess that's going to change, though, right?
Changing to District 8 next year. 2023.
2023 is when it changes. So he represents Davis and Salt Lake County, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, Todd actually is quite an institution, I think, in the Senate.
I don't know about that.
You know, it's really interesting to work with you, Todd, because I like the way you handle yourself and the bills, and you know, I especially like this interim session, basically being on the Judiciary Committee with you.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, so what are you planning now? What kinds of things are you interested in? I think I'd like to have our audience get to know you a little better.
Well, yeah, thanks. I'm Todd Weiler. I live in Woods Cross. I'm married to my wife, Elizabeth. We've been married for 30 and a half years and have 4 grown children. I'm an attorney by trade, and as you mentioned, I chair the Judiciary Committee, and also in the Senate that's combined with the law enforcement and criminal justice. And so a lot of the bills that I run, John, come to me because of my legal background and because of my committee chairmanship. So probably 2/3 of the bills I run kind of are legal in nature in one way or another. So and I've got a lot of bills for this upcoming session. Something I've been working on really a lot in the last 2 months is some reforms to our Justice Reinvested initiative that we passed in 2016, and that was to focus more on drug addicts getting rehabilitation instead of just going and doing hard time. But you know, we're 5-6 years into it, and we're going to be tweaking it a little bit because we haven't gotten the results that we were hoping for.
Now, I noticed one of the big issues that seems to be appearing in the paper a lot is this repeal of the death penalty. What do you think is going to happen with that?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm voting no on the repeal. I think that the death penalty is an important tool to have in the toolbox. I don't really care if it has a deterrent effect. I don't believe the numbers on the savings that we would reap. In fact, you don't know this, John, but about 4 years ago, I chaired an interim committee, and I called in a fiscal analyst who said we'd save like $2 million a year if we repeal the death penalty. And I said, where would those savings come from? He said, well, we wouldn't need all these attorneys in the Attorney General's office. So then I called in the Attorney General's office in the committee, and I said, how many people would you lay off if we repeal the death penalty today? And they said 0. And so all of these reports about how much money we're going to save, I think it's pie in the sky. And furthermore, if you have a prisoner that if you would have executed them when they're 40, but they live to be 100, I'm just making up a hypothetical. Do you know what the health care expenses are for an 80-year-old man, an 85-year-old man, a 90-year-old man, a 95-year-old man? All the state's all paying for that. And I asked the analyst, I said, what accounting have you done for the increased health care costs of housing someone until they die? And they said, oh, we didn't really think about that.
That's interesting that they wouldn't have thought about that. There was a really good email that I got today from one of the assistants in Utah County, and apparently it was an op-ed in the paper before.
Yes, in fact, I talked to that gentleman for about an hour last week. So, yeah, he's resigned. He's retired from the Utah County Attorney's Office, but he worked in that office twice and has about 34 years of experience as a prosecutor. And I think the primary reason he resigned is because the county attorney down there said that he'll no longer seek the death penalty in any of the cases, which, you know, I don't agree with.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page with you on that.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of this criminal justice reform that's been happening. Some of it I thought was good. Other pieces of it, though, you know, I guess I was one of the few people that voted against the bail reform that we just had.
Yes.
And you know, when I was talking to the sponsor of that bill from the House, she asked me why I voted against it. Nobody else did, and I said it seems pretty close to the one we repealed. and she said, well, yeah, I guess it is kind of close. and I thought, well, I mean, that's why I voted against it, I guess. But you know, I think some of this criminal justice reform is good. Mm-hmm. I think other pieces of it are are hampering our law enforcement officials. And
yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I think we're going to come back and try to tweak some of the changes we made in 2016 with JRI. We call it JRI, Justice Reinvested Initiative. We were promised a lot of huge changes in recidivism that have not really come into fruition. And what we found is while we wanted to change the emphasis for people who were so what we were told back then is, look, there are good people and there are bad people. And sometimes good people get addicted to drugs and then they do some bad things. But if you can treat their addiction, they're not a threat to your family, to your children. You know, they're not going to punch you in the face and try to kill you or whatever. And so we need to kind of separate those. So so we passed this reform, and I still support the reform. In fact, Stuart Adams was the sponsor of the bill in the Senate. But what we found now is that there are some very bad people, violent criminals, who are also addicted to drugs, and we're treating them like they're good people that are just addicted to drugs. And that's what I think that's what we need to fix.
Well, I really I appreciate your thoughtful approach to a lot of that.
Well, thanks.
Because I think there's a lot of thought that goes into it. I can see the frustration sometimes when other people don't see the light.
You notice I get frustrated. The legislature is a wonderful process, and I don't always get my way, and I know you don't always get your way, and that's part of the beauty of it. And the wonderful thing about the legislature is if we get it wrong, we can always come back the next year and fix it. So that's what we do a lot of.
Well, and I think people have to take that into account a lot of times. They think we're kind of skating back and forth, but we need to see whether things are going to work the way they're supposed to, right?
Yeah. And sometimes you don't know until you try it. So it's kind of like parenting that way. So like, oh, that didn't work.
Well, I get a little frustrated with some of it though, because I just think that we could come together a little better, I think, on things. But that's why I follow your lead sometimes, because of the way you present things.
Well, thanks.
And the mannerisms you have. And
that's a nice compliment.
Yeah. So, we're going to take a break.
Hi, I'm Sue Wilkerson. I'm the broker owner of Remax Crossroads. We're located in that great historic building on the corner of 24th and Monroe in Ogden. We specialize in historic real estate, but we're pretty good at finding you whatever you're looking for. It's a very tough real estate market out there. It is difficult for a seller because you really want to make sure you choose the right buyer to purchase your property. And it's tough for buyers because it's very difficult to make that transition between one house and another. We're great at it. We've had 20 years of experience selling houses, and we really enjoy what we do. So next time you have a real estate question, we're more than happy to help you out. Thanks so much.
Welcome back to the PoliticIt Podcast. Tonight we've got Todd Weiler. We're having I got to know Todd a little bit better this session, working on the Judiciary Committee and watching some of the things you do there.
Well, thanks.
But why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about the way you approach problems in the Senate? You've been there quite a while, and you seem to have the history with the Senate and understand where people are and stuff. But
yeah, thanks. I'm going to hit my 10-year mark next month in January, or maybe this month, assuming I'm not sure when this will come out. But and so I've risen in seniority as people ahead of me have stepped down or retired or whatnot. Not very many legislators get defeated, but that did happen with Senator Hilliard last year. But in any event, I've really enjoyed my work in the legislature, and I want to emphasize the word work. And you've got a year under your belt now. It is a lot of work. There's a lot of tough issues. I really enjoy just having a seat at the table, working on some of the biggest problems that are facing the state. And those problems, some of those issues come back every year, and some of them are kind of one and done. I remember we spent a whole year on, or maybe 2 years on prison relocation, and got thousands of emails. And once we decided that, then we moved on to the next topic. This year we're going to spend, I think, a lot of time on the Great Salt Lake. And I know the Speaker, Brad Wilson's, holding a summit next week. And we're talking about maybe spending $50 million trying to save the Great Salt Lake. And this will be my 11th session. We've never had a bill about the Great Salt Lake before. So there are new issues, and then education funding, transportation, clean air, those issues just recycle every year. And so I don't know. I'm a very pragmatic person. I try to just roll up my sleeves and solve a problem if I can understand it. And I'll tell you something, John, a decision I made my first week in the legislature, and I've never regretted it, is I decided, and no offense at this, because I know you do a lot with education, I decided there's so many legislators that are focused on education that I'm going to focus on everything else.
Oh.
So I kind of leave education to the rest of you.
Yeah.
I'm not on those committees. I don't run really education bills. Every once in a while I have a bill that will seep over into education, but it's usually another topic that's kind of, bridges to education. But in my whole 10 sessions, I think I've run 3 bills that went to the education committee. But there is a lot of everything else. And
Yeah.
so, we've got about 20 legislators at any given time who all they're doing is kind of focusing on education. So I'm like, somebody else has to focus on the rest of the stuff.
So I'm curious on this thing on the Great Salt Lake.
Yeah.
What's the issue there?
Well, I think that the issue is we've had a couple drought years, and we've also had enough development of our state, which is going to continue, that we're siphoning off enough water that the levels have dropped to historic lows, and it's threatening the future, the stability of the lake. And as a side note, when the lake shrinks, it exposes all of these the area that used to be underneath, the mud banks that used to be underneath, and as that dries out in the summer and the wind blows, then that actually really negatively affects our air quality, because all of that dust gets into our lungs and into our noses. I mean, just fine particles that you can't see. But and I'm not an expert on all of it, but obviously we have a thriving brine shrimp industry, and the lake also has the lake effect for our snow. Right. Our ski resorts benefit from the lake, and I think there's thousands of implications of the lake. And if it were to dry up and go away, I think the Salt Lake Valley would be a very different place. The Wasatch Front, not just the Salt Lake Valley.
That's interesting. I'll have to read a little bit more about that. I don't know a lot about the exact bills that are coming up and stuff, but there's an interesting development down in Utah County with the Utah Lake, right? And that seems kind of an interesting.
Yeah, I've heard, during my 10 sessions, I've heard different plans about maybe building islands in the middle of Utah Lake and putting like a city in the middle. I've heard, that they seem to, there's some people that want to build a bridge over it, so there's an easier way out of Eagle Mountain and Saratoga Springs without, plodding through Main Street on Lehigh. And so I'm not sure exactly which issue you were referring to.
Well, that was basically a group of developers, I guess, has come up with a plan to build this city, right? And I guess they're going to fund a lot of the dredging of the lake.
Yeah.
But in return, they would get access to this land that's developed as they dredge the lake. But
and most people don't realize Utah Lake is a very shallow lake. I think the greatest depth at any point is like 15 feet, but most of it's like 3 or 4 feet or under 6 feet. So I mean, and yet people still drown in there, more frequently than you'd expect with such a shallow lake.
Right. So what other big issues are you looking at?
Well, I don't know about big issues. I never know if they're big until the session starts and you kind of see what has opposition. But I'm running a bill about electric bikes. Do you have an electric bike?
No.
I love my electric bike. I've kind of become the electric bike guy. It's funny in the legislature, John, if you pass one bill on kind of an esoteric topic, then you're the guy until you leave the legislature on that topic.
Yeah.
So I've done that several times. So I'm the e-bike guy. We just I passed some monumental legislation on e-bikes about 5 or 6 years ago, because some cities were treating e-bikes the same as motorcycles. And so I think we could all agree on certain like pedestrian paths. You may not want a motorcycle, but an e-bike that's, basically the same as a bike would be okay. And so, the goal of my legislation last time, but I've been approached by that industry and they're trying to reform it. I always have an indigent defense bill, and one of my jokes is the Sixth Amendment needs a better lobbyist, because the Second Amendment, the First Amendment kind of steal all the thunder. But under the Sixth Amendment, people that are accused of crimes have the right to counsel. If they can't afford it, it has to be appointed to them. And John, when I entered the legislature, I was shocked to find out that Utah was really not leading the nation, but really we were one of the worst in the nation in making sure that people that they got appointed counsel and that their defense attorneys weren't overworked and underpaid. And so I've been working on this effort for about 6 years, just making sure that our constitutional rights for our accused are upheld. And, nobody runs for office and says, doggone it, I want to make sure that we pay more money to public defenders. But in any event, it's still important, and that's
So we're really one of the worst states on that.
We were. I think we've gotten better, but we were one of the only 2 states in the nation 5 years ago that had kicked it, that had no state money in the game. What we did back in the 60s was we kicked it to the counties and said, it's your problem now. The Supreme Court said it's a state, U.S. Supreme Court said it's a state responsibility. We delegate it to the counties, and some of the counties did a really good job with it, and others did almost nothing with it. And if you can imagine, if you're a county commissioner I'm just going to pick on San Juan County, because they don't have a lot of money, over 95% of their land is controlled by the BLM, et cetera. So if you've got an extra 2 nickels to rub together, are you going to spend that on potholes, or are you going to spend it on public defenders? And I think you and I both know you'd spend it on potholes. And if you do that for 40 or 50 years, which is what happened in a lot of our rural counties, then the public defender system was really struggling. And by the way, we actually can save money if we make those investments right, because if someone's convicted when they shouldn't have been convicted, then we're going to support them in jail. Or if they spend 10 years in jail when they should have only spent 2 years in jail, we're going to spend 8 years, housing them and feeding them. And so there is a delayed effect, I think. Plus we're upholding people's
rights. And if
rights.
there's any reform to the criminal justice system, it seems like that's the one that we should be the most worried about.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because none of us wants to send someone to jail
that shouldn't be there.
That shouldn't be there,
Yeah.
right? And I guess it seems to me that you could show pretty readily, empirically, that does happen. That people with better attorneys tend to stay out of jail.
Yeah. And another issue I'm working on, you probably heard about this, but you probably didn't know there was going to be a bill. But Davis County was investigated by the federal government for some alleged racism, and there were some anecdotal experiences that were horrific to read about. And they entered into a settlement and recently with the Department of Justice. And what I'm doing I'm working with Sandra Hollins, Representative Hollins in the House, who is the only African American member of the legislature. And we're going to take some of the terms of that settlement and broaden that out to other districts to make sure that the kids are not bullied or treated disparately because of the color of their skin. And so that bill
She seems like a really reasonable person.
Yeah, she is. I mean, she's a
actually-
Democrat, of course, and she's she's got a very Democratic base in her district. But we actually overlap our districts in Rose Park, because as you mentioned, I live in Davis County, but my district stretches down to Salt Lake County. And in fact, when the new boundaries go into effect, the Utah Capitol will be part of my new district.
Oh, it
right
will?
now it's in Senator Kitchen's district, but I'm taking over the upper avenues with the redistricting.
Oh, really?
And I just want to say, Republicans, we get accused of gerrymandering a lot, which is really ironic, because when the Democrats say, well, draw us a district that only a Democrat could win for Congress, that is by definition gerrymandering.
Right.
But if the Republicans try to draw 4 equal districts, then somehow we're the bad guys. But what I want to say is we also get accused of wanting to pick our own constituents rather than letting the voters or some independent cabal pick them. But I like to joke, if I were picking my own constituents, I would have probably picked more Republicans in Davis County to be in my district, but instead I ended up with a lot more Democrats in Salt Lake County in my district. And
so how do you think that's going to affect your?
Well, it'll make my margins a little bit tighter, but I think I should be okay. And so it's still, 80% of my district will still be in Davis County. And of course, there are some Democrats in Davis County, and there also are some Republicans in Salt Lake County, in my areas of Salt Lake County, but they switched from about 65-35 in Davis County.
So some of that was in Derek Kitchen's district.
So
now what did he pick up to make up?
I haven't studied his map, but my old district didn't grow as fast as the state, so I needed to pick up some areas. And the legislative map and all three of the independent commissions map all were pushing me further into Salt Lake County. And so it's not a big surprise to me that that's what ended up happening. But two of those independent commission maps would have combined Luz Escamilla and me into the same district, which really makes no sense.
Which would be tragic, honestly,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, we'd hate to lose her, right?
Yeah.
I'm
No,
being presumptive,
honestly,
but yeah.
though. I think
Yeah.
that's true.
Yeah, she's an important voice. And I was joking because maybe we would have lost me and would have kept her.
Yeah.
You don't know until you hold those.
Well,
positions, so.
it depends on really how the district's
Yeah.
drawn, right?
One of those independent maps on the House side of the State House put Brian King and 3 other Democrats, so 4 Democratic House members all in the one district, which is just crazy. And the U.S. Supreme Court has recognized that one factor that legislatures can consider is, Lyle Hilliard represented his constituents for 40 years. So they have a relationship. They voted for him.
Right.
And so to completely ignore that and say, well, we're going to put all of Lyle's people now in Scott Sandals' district, is a lot of people would feel cheated. Wait a second, I built up this relationship. And so one of the things I think the Independent Redistricting Commission got wrong is they didn't pay any respect at all to the relationship that voters have with their
Don't you think they spent more time though on the congressional maps? Don't you?
I think that was the focus, yeah.
Yeah.
And they drew maps that Democrats couldn't lose, which again we've already decided is called gerrymandering.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting. We had Rob Bishop right after he resigned.
Yeah.
Ryan Wilcox and I had him in on the podcast, and it was interesting to hear his story about why he did that, why he resigned from the commission and what he was worried about.
Yeah.
And
what a great public servant Rob Bishop is. He's really dedicated most of his life to community service.
Yeah.
As a teacher and
fascinating guy to listen to.
Yeah, very smart.
Being a history professor and stuff, he had a lot to say when we started talking about critical race theory and other things that are going on. So that was one more thing I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
We passed that
resolution.
And I actually really liked your speech on the floor.
Oh, thanks.
Where are you at on that issue?
Well, I need to listen to other people because I know our resolution asked the state school board to step in and act, and they have. And so, I don't know nearly as much about this topic as you do, but I don't want to come back and pick at those scabs unless there's a good reason to. One of my legislative philosophies is to stay in my lane. And so because we have a state school board that's created by our state constitution and we have 15 independently elected people, I tend to say if this is something that the state school boards can do or the local school boards can do, we don't need the legislature to be a super school board. We already have, every person in Utah already has, they have 2 school board members who represent them, one on the local school board in their county and one on the state school board. And so I don't know that the legislature needs to pretend like we're a third super school board. And so if this is an issue that can and has been addressed by the state school board, I would say, I'm okay with that.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a good point.
Yeah.
Actually, because, I've kind of struggled with a lot of the issues because for one, I'm a university professor.
Sure.
So, I believe in the concept of academic freedom and what we should be doing.
Yeah.
Some of the abuses of that, though, I'm a bit concerned about. Having been in the university system for a long time, I was a professor. Then I left to start a software company, but then I come back after I retired.
And I told you just before we went on the air, I'm an adjunct law professor at the BYU Law School, which is actually called the J. Reuben Clark Law School.
So what do you teach?
I just teach a little legislative bill drafting workshop one semester every year, but it's kind of fun and allows me to get connect with the students, and you'll notice I'll make sure to introduce one. Usually I have a few law school students follow me around during the session because they're up there checking things out. So it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun that way.
Yeah. A lot of them need to recognize that is a potential place for them to end up. Right.
one of my students has graduated from law school. All of my students have graduated from law school except for this year's, but and he's now working in the public defender, and he's up at the Capitol every session now testifying on bills as they relate to public defense. So he's kind of become, I think because of my class, kind of a very helpful voice when we're weighing, different issues between prosecutors and defense attorneys.
It's interesting. When I went into the Senate, I was a little bit nervous because I thought I'd never drafted a bill before. And
we have a lot of help.
Then I find out that we don't actually draft our own.
We
bills,
have
right?
we have a great law firm called the Office of Legislative Research and General Counsel that do most of that laboring work for us. And even as an attorney, I don't draft my own bills, so they have to go through a certain process and be numbered. And
Right.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating to learn about, and I think that's why it's cool that we do bring students in.
Sure.
To kind of learn the process.
And one of the best kept secrets, John, is how great our staff is at every level, and we have a lot of help, which is ultimately we're making the important policy decisions, but we have a lot of help there, and I think that's important because you and I, you're teaching your classes, and I'm out practicing law and in the courts. And so it's easy for us to get distracted off of legislative business when we're not in session. So it's important to have some, PhDs and other professionals who are minding the business of the state the whole year long.
Right.
And they can give us good advice and tell us what our options are and make recommendations and things like that.
Yeah, I didn't realize how busy, though, we would be outside of the regular session.
That's the other best kept secret is people say, oh, it's just a 45-day session, which is true. But the work never goes away. So how many emails did you get yesterday?
A ton.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, especially now where the session is fairly close.
Yeah.
Right, but well, Todd, I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me. This has been fun.
It's been nice to talk to you, and
absolutely.
I look forward to working with you in the legislature and even more.
Well, thanks, John.
And appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next week. Thank you.